What killed people who opened King Tut's tomb? The gilded doorway. The story begins not with a curse but with a thirst. For 33 centuries, the boy king lay in silence, wrapped in linen and gold, his face covered by a mask that would become the most famous object in the world. The Valley of the Kings had been picked over by robbers, explored by archaeologists, and mapped by treasure hunters. By 1922, most experts believed there was nothing left to find. Howard Carter, a man of obsessive patience and frequent bad luck, thought otherwise. He had been searching for the tomb of Tutankhamun for 7 years. Lord Carnarvon, his wealthy patron, had grown tired of the expense. "One more season," Carter begged. Carnarvon agreed. That single season changed everything. On November 4th, 1922, a water boy digging in the sand uncovered a step cut into the bedrock. By the next afternoon, Carter's workmen had exposed an entire staircase descending into the earth. At the bottom, a plastered doorway, sealed and stamped with the necropolis seal, the jackal and 9 captives. But there was more. Beneath that, faint but legible, the cartouche of Tutankhamun. Carter sent a telegram to Carnarvon, who was in England. "At last have made wonderful discovery in Valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact." What followed was not just the greatest archaeological find of the century. It was the beginning of a legend so powerful that nearly 100 years later, the phrase "curse of the pharaohs" still sends a chill through the spine. And at the heart of that legend lies a simple, terrifying question. Did something inside that tomb kill the people who opened it? The answer is stranger, more fascinating, and more human than any horror movie. It is a story of mold and mosquitoes, of newspapers and misinformation, of science fumbling in the dark, and a public hungry for magic. This is the real story of what killed the people who opened King Tut's tomb. The cast of characters. Before we can understand the deaths, we must understand the living. Who were these people? They were not all archaeologists. They were not all present at the opening. The myth of the curse would eventually swallow dozens of names, some of whom never even saw the Nile. But the core group, the ones who truly stood at the threshold of that tomb, were a peculiar collection of Yingguarani Egyptians and international adventurers. Howard Carter was the leader. Born in 1874 in London, the son of a painter, he had no formal education beyond art school. He learned archaeology by doing it, drawing every pot shard and bone he uncovered. He was meticulous, difficult, and suspicious of nearly everyone. He did not believe in curses. He believed in careful documentation, conservation, and credit. When he first peered through a hole he made in the tomb's inner doorway, Lord Carnarvon asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter replied with words that would be printed in 1,000 books. "Yes, wonderful things." George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, was the money. A titled English aristocrat with a passion for Egyptology and a collection of rare cars, he was also frail. A car accident in Germany years earlier had left him with damaged lungs that never fully healed. He was prone to chest infections, bronchitis, and a general fragility that he masked with enthusiasm. He loved the romance of Egypt, the dry heat, the antiquity, the thrill of discovery. He also loved his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, whom he brought along for the opening of the tomb. Arthur Callender was an engineer who had retired to Egypt for his health. He was Carter's right hand, the man who rigged the lighting, reinforced the walls, and did the heavy lifting. He was practical, skeptical, and physically robust. He would outlive almost everyone. Alfred Lucas was the chemist. When objects began to decay the moment they touched air, Lucas was there with preservatives and patience. He analyzed the resins, the oils, the fabrics. He was a scientist to his bones. Pierre Lacaux was the director of the Department of Antiquities in Egypt. He was French, bureaucratic, and deeply suspicious of Carter. He did not open the tomb himself, but he controlled who could enter. He would later become a key figure in the cursed narrative for reasons that had nothing to do with supernatural forces. Lord Carnarvon's half-brother, Aubrey Herbert, came to visit. He was a politician, a traveler, and a man with famously bad teeth. He would die, but not in Egypt, and not soon after the tomb opening. Sir Bruce Ingram was a newspaper editor who received a paperweight made of mummified hand from a friend in Egypt. He would have a strange story attached to him. Professor Douglas Derry was the anatomist who performed the autopsy on Tutankhamun's body. He spent hours unwrapping the linen, examining the bones, and trying to determine how a 19-year-old king died. He breathed the same air as the mummy for days. Dr. Alexandra Keeler, a British surgeon, was present at the autopsy. He held the skull, the ribs, the desiccated organs. Richard Bethel was Carter's secretary, a young man who handled the paperwork, the correspondence, and the endless lists of objects. He spent more time inside the tomb than almost anyone else. Evelyn White, a writer and friend of Carter's, visited the tomb and later wrote about it. He would take his own life years later, and the curse would claim him too. Muhammad Ahmed, an Egyptian workman, helped clear the tomb. He died decades later, forgotten by the Western press. George J. Gould, an American railroad magnate, visited the tomb and got sand in his lungs. He died of pneumonia in France. Joel Woolley, another American visitor, caught a fever after his tour. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a physician who examined the mummy, died of a mysterious illness. The list goes on. By the time the newspapers were done, the curse had killed more than 20 people. But the reality, as always, is more complicated. Let us go back to the moment of opening. The night of the step. The tomb was not opened all at once. It was a process of days, weeks, months. The staircase was cleared on November 4th. The first sealed doorway was photographed and documented. Then came a second doorway, then a third. Inside, not a single chamber, but a labyrinth of rooms. The antechamber, the annex, the treasury, and finally the burial chamber itself, dominated by a massive golden shrine that contained, within 4 nested boxes of gilded wood, the stone sarcophagus, within which were 3 nested coffins, the innermost made of solid gold, holding the mummy of the king. Each time a doorway was breached, the air inside rushed out, ancient air sealed for 3,000 years. What was in that air? We know now with the benefit of modern science. But in 1922, they had no idea. The first oddity was noticed immediately. The plaster used to seal the doors was covered in strange dark spots, mold growth. The ancient Egyptians had sealed the tomb while the plaster was still damp, and over the millennia, microbes had grown on the surface. When Carter and Carnarvon first entered, they reported a strange smell. Not the dry dust they expected, something else. Damp, sour, metallic. Howard Carter wrote in his diary, "The air was hot and thick, almost oppressive. There was a faint odor of something I cannot describe, not unpleasant but strange." Lord Carnarvon said to his daughter, "It smells like death." He meant it poetically. He did not know how right he was. Within days of the first opening, something else happened. A rumor began among the Egyptian workmen. They whispered about an inscription above the door, a curse against anyone who disturbed the Pharaoh's rest. Carter looked for the inscription. He never found it. No such inscription exists anywhere in Tutankhamun's tomb. The closest thing in any royal tomb is a warning in the tomb of Kentaka Ekeki. "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb, I will seize him like a bird. I will cast the fear of me into him." But that is not in Tutankhamun's tomb. The famous "death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king" was invented by a newspaper writer. It appears nowhere in any ancient text. But the rumor persisted because the workmen were terrified. They refused to go deeper. Carter had to pay them triple wages and promise protective amulets. One of them, a man named Hussein Abd el-Rasul, told a reporter years later, "We were not afraid of the Pharaoh. We were afraid of the mold. The dust made us cough blood." That last part is probably an exaggeration, but the fear was real. The first death did not happen for several months, and when it did, it was not a workman or an archaeologist. It was a canary. The canary that started a legend. Howard Carter kept a pet canary in his house on the west bank of the Nile. He was fond of the bird. On the morning of November 6, 1922, 2 days after the step was discovered, Carter woke to find his house in an uproar. A cobra had gotten into the cage and eaten the canary. The Egyptian workmen were distraught. In their culture, the cobra was the symbol of the pharaoh, the Urias, the protector of kings. The canary, they said, was Carter's good luck bird. The cobra had come to warn the pharaoh's enemies. One of the workmen, Ahmed Garagar, later told a journalist, The snake came from the tomb. It was the Pharaoh's spirit. He was telling us to stay away. Carter dismissed it as coincidence. Cobras are common in Egypt. They eat small animals. It was a warm season, but the story spread. The canary was the first casualty of the curse, the newspaper said. Never mind that Carter lived another 17 years and died in his bed at the age of 64. The canary became a symbol. The real first human death came in March of 1923, about 4 months after the tomb was open. And the victim was the most famous person associated with the dig, Lord Carnarvon himself. The death of Lord Carnarvon. Carnarvon had been in Egypt since November. He had seen the wonders of the antechamber, the golden throne, the alabaster jars, the life-size statues of the king. He had been present for the opening of the burial chamber in February 1923, when Carter cracked the seal on the fourth golden shrine, and they saw for the first time the stone sarcophagus. He was thrilled, he was exhausted, and he was sick. Carnarvon had always been frail. The car accident in Germany in 1901 had left him with chronic lung problems. He was prone to bronchitis and pneumonia, and the dry desert air usually helped. But this season was different. He had been inside the tomb for hours on end, breathing air that had been trapped for 3 millennia. He had been coughing more than usual. On March 6, 1923, he was in Luxor, staying at the Winter Palace Hotel. He was complaining of a fever and a sore throat. He had a shaving cut on his cheek, a small nick from his razor. The cut became infected. Within days, his face swelled. The infection spread to his sinuses, then to his lungs. He developed pneumonia. His fever spiked to 104 degrees. His daughter, Lady Evelyn, stayed by his side. Carter rushed to the hotel. A doctor was called, Dr. Mahaffey, an Irish physician who had practiced in Egypt for decades. He administered anti-serum for the infection. It did nothing. On April 5, 1923, at exactly 2 a.m, Lord Carnarvon died. And then the legend exploded. At the moment of Carnarvon's death, according to multiple sources who were in Cairo at the time, all the lights in the city went out. A power failure plunged the capital into darkness. In Luxor, Lady Evelyn wrote in her diary, "The lights went out, we sat in the dark, and then the dogs began to howl." Back in England, at Carnarvon's estate, Highclere Castle, which you may know as Downton Abbey, his favorite dog, a fox terrier named Susie, reportedly let out a howl and dropped dead on the spot. The newspapers went wild. "Pharaoh's curse kills Lord Carnarvon," screamed the headlines. The New York Times ran a story about the power outage. The London papers printed the dog story. Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes and a fervent believer in spiritualism, publicly stated that the death was likely caused by elementals created by the ancient Egyptian priests to protect the tomb. Within a week, Carnarvon's half-brother, Aubrey Herbert, also died. He had not been in Egypt. He had not even seen the tomb. He died of blood poisoning following a dental extraction. But the curse claimed him anyway. And so the pattern was set. Every death, no matter how mundane, no matter how far removed in time or geography, would be attributed to the Pharaoh's revenge. The real cause of Lord Carnarvon's death. Let us stop here and examine the facts. Carnarvon died of pneumonia complicated by septicemia, blood poisoning from the infected shaving cut. The immediate cause of death was respiratory failure. But what weakened him in the first place? Was it something in the tomb? Modern science has several theories, and they are far more interesting than a curse. Aspergillus niger. When Carter opened the tomb, he disturbed thousands of years of accumulated organic matter. The ancient Egyptians placed food, wine, oils, and perfumes in the tomb for the king's afterlife. Over 3,000 years, these organic materials decayed, but in the sealed, dark, slightly damp environment, they did not completely break down. Instead, they became a breeding ground for fungi. Aspergillus niger is a common fungus found in decaying vegetation. It produces tiny spores that become airborne when disturbed. Inhaling these spores can cause a condition called aspergillosis. In healthy people, the immune system handles it. But in people with compromised lungs, like Carnarvon with his chronic bronchitis from the car accident, the spores can take hold. They grow in the sinuses, the bronchial tubes, the lungs. They cause inflammation, bleeding, and a persistent cough. They weaken the immune system, making secondary infections like pneumonia far more dangerous. Carnarvon had been inside the tomb for hours. He had breathed the air. He had been coughing. The incision from the shaving cut, perhaps he touched his face after touching a wall or an artifact, allowed the fungus to enter his bloodstream directly. Septicemia followed. In 2013, a team of scientists from the University of Cairo and the University of Texas took samples from the tomb's walls. They found several species of fungi, including Aspergillus niger and Aspergillus flavus, as well as bacteria like Pseudomonas and Staphylococcus. All of them are potentially dangerous to people with weakened immune systems. Bacteria in the food. The tomb contained jars of honey, grain, and meat. Honey never spoils. It has natural antibacterial properties. But the grain and meat did spoil. Clostridium bacteria, which cause botulism and tetanus, can survive for thousands of years in spore form. Carnarvon did not eat any of the food, but he touched it. The shaving cut provided an entry point. Toxic fumes. The ancient Egyptians used resins and essential oils in the mummification process. Cedar oil, myrrh, frankincense, bitumen. Over time, these resins break down into volatile organic compounds. When the tomb was opened, these gases were released. In high concentrations, they can cause respiratory irritation, headaches, nausea, and dizziness. In someone already sick, they could trigger a severe reaction. Bat guano. The tomb had been visited by bats at some point before it was sealed. The ceiling of the antechamber had bat droppings. Histoplasma capsulatum is a fungus that grows in bat guano. Inhaling its spores causes histoplasmosis, a lung disease that mimics pneumonia. It can be fatal in immunocompromised patients. Simple exposure. The most boring theory is also the most likely. Carnarvon was already sick. He traveled to Egypt in the winter, which was cold and damp, for the Nile Valley temperatures at night can drop to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. He exerted himself climbing into and out of the tomb. He had a minor cut. He got infected. In 1923, antibiotics did not exist. Penicillin would not be discovered until 1928. A simple staph infection that would be cured by a pill today was a death sentence. None of these theories require a curse. They require microbiology, history, and bad luck. But the curse is a better story, and the newspapers knew it. The morning after. The death of Lord Carnarvon turned the Tutankhamun excavation into a global media circus. Every death from that moment forward would be scrutinized. Reporters flocked to Luxor. They bribed workmen for stories. They made things up. One paper printed that Carter had found a curse tablet in the tomb that read, "Death will slay with his wings whoever disturbs the peace of the Pharaoh." No such tablet exists. Another wrote that the mummy's hand had been found raised in a warning gesture. The mummy's hands were crossed over its chest, exactly as Egyptian burial practice dictated. The most famous part of the curse legend, the Wings of Death inscription, was invented by Marie Corelli, a popular novelist of the day. She wrote a letter to the New York Times claiming that an ancient Arabic manuscript described the curse. She never produced the manuscript. Her letter became the basis for every newspaper story that followed. Howard Carter was furious. He hated the publicity. He hated the tourists who flocked to the valley, hoping to glimpse the tomb or catch a whiff of the curse. He hated that his careful scientific work was being overshadowed by superstition. In a letter to his friend, he wrote, "The whole affair is a confounded nuisance. I wish they would all go to the devil and leave us to our work." But the deaths continued, or at least the newspapers said they did. The second death. In July 1923, about 3 months after Carnarvon, another figure connected to the tomb died. His name was George J. Gould. He was an American millionaire, the son of railroad tycoon Jay Gould. He visited the tomb in early 1923, shortly after Carnarvon. He spent an afternoon inside breathing the same air. He returned to France, developed a high fever, and died of pneumonia on May 16, 1923. The curse claimed another victim. But here's the problem. George J. Gould was 61 years old. He had a history of heart disease. He had traveled from Egypt to the south of France in the spring, when the weather changes and respiratory infections are common. Pneumonia killed many people in 1923. It was one of the leading causes of death worldwide. The fact that a rich old man with a bad heart caught pneumonia after traveling across continents is not surprising. Nevertheless, the newspapers added his name to the list. Then came Sir Bruce Ingram. He had never been to Egypt. He had never seen the tomb. But he had a friend in Cairo who sent him a paperweight made from the mummified hand of an ancient Egyptian princess. Ingram put it on his desk. Shortly thereafter, his house caught fire. When he tried to escape, he tripped and fell. He was not badly hurt, but the newspaper said the curse had reached across the ocean. Ingram himself found it all very amusing. He kept the hand. He died 17 years later, at the age of 86, from old age. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a physician who had examined the mummy during the autopsy, died in January 1924. Cause of death, mysterious illness, according to the papers. Actually, he died of a heart attack. He was 52 years old and overweight. Professor Albert Lithgow, an Egyptologist from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, who had helped Carter photograph the tomb, died in 1934. He was 66. Cause of death, stroke. He had high blood pressure. Arthur Mace, a member of Carter's team, died in 1928. He had been in poor health for years, suffering from pleurisy and bronchitis. He died of arsenic poisoning, but the arsenic came from a medication he was taking for a skin condition, not from the tomb. Richard Bethel, Carter's secretary, died in November 1929. He was found smothered in his bed in a London hotel. The papers screamed, "Curse!" but Scotland Yard ruled it an accident. Bethel had a heart condition and had been drinking. He likely had a heart attack in his sleep, and his body position restricted his breathing. His father, Lord Westbury, committed suicide by jumping from a window shortly after. The curse, the papers said, had driven him mad. In fact, Lord Westbury had been suffering from severe depression for years. And so it went. Every death of anyone who had ever been in the same continent as the tomb became evidence of the curse. By 1930, the list had grown to 22 names. By 1950, it was 26. By the 1970s, some books claim 44 victims. The workmen and the forgotten dead. And here is something the newspapers never mentioned. Of the dozens of Egyptian workmen who actually cleared the tomb, who spent days, weeks, months inside the chambers, moving artifacts, sweeping floors, breathing the dust and the mold, almost all of them lived long, healthy lives. Mohammed Ahmed, the foreman, died in 1967 at the age of 83. He had worked on the excavation for 10 years. He was present for every opening. He helped carry the golden coffin out of the tomb. He died surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Ahmed Garagar, the man who had told the story of the cobra and the canary, died in 1972. He was 97. Hussein Abd el-Rasul, the one who spoke of coughing blood, died in 1956 at the age of 72. None of them were cursed. They had something that Carnarvon and Gould and the other wealthy visitors did not. They had been exposed to the tomb's environment gradually, over years, rather than in a single intense burst. Their immune systems adapted, or perhaps they simply had better genes. Or perhaps there was no curse at all, and the entire thing was a product of coincidence, bad journalism, and the human love of a good scary story. But wait, you say, what about the strange coincidence of the lights going out when Carnarvon died? What about the howling dogs? What about the cobra that ate the canary? Let us take each one. The power outage happened in Cairo on April 5, 1923, but Cairo had frequent power outages in the 1920s. The electrical grid was unreliable. The outage occurred at 2 a.m. when demand was low and the system was prone to fluctuations. Dozens of power outages happened in Cairo that year. Only one was recorded because a famous man died. The howling dogs were a detail added by Lady Evelyn in her diary. Dogs howl for many reasons. They sense weather changes, they hear other dogs, they are anxious. Carnarvon had been sick for a month. The household was under stress. The dog likely sensed that, not the supernatural but the emotional chaos of a family in mourning. The cobra that ate the canary was almost certainly just a cobra. They are apex predators in Egyptian villages. They eat birds. It was a coincidence that it happened when it did. Coincidences are not curses. What the autopsy revealed. Let us return to the mummy itself. In 1925, 3 years after the tomb was open, Howard Carter finally allowed the autopsy of Tutankhamun. Professor Douglas Derry and Dr. Alexandra Keeler performed the examination. They unwrapped the linen, layer by layer, for 8 days. The smell was overwhelming, a mixture of resins, decayed linens, and ancient sweat. They wore no masks, no gloves. They breathed the air directly. They handled the body with their bare hands. If there was any curse, surely these men would die. But Derry lived until 1969, dying at the age of 87. Keeler lived until 1960, dying at the age of 79. Neither showed any unusual illness after the autopsy. Derry went on to become the head of anatomy at Cairo University. He wrote extensively about his experience. He said in a 1962 interview, "The curse is nonsense. I have handled 100 mummies. I am still here." So what did they find inside the mummy? The answer to that question is the key to understanding a different kind of death, the death of Tutankhamun himself. The boy king was about 19 when he died. The mummy showed a fracture in the left thigh bone just above the knee. For decades, scholars believed he was murdered, possibly by a blow to the head, because the skull showed a missing piece of bone. But modern CT scans performed in 2005 revealed that the skull damage occurred after death, probably during the embalming process, when the brain was removed through the nose. The leg fracture, however, was real. It showed signs of healing, new bone growth, meaning Tutankhamun lived for several days or weeks after the injury. He likely died of a combination of the leg infection, septicemia, and malaria, which was detected in his DNA in a 2010 study. The boy king had a severe form of malaria, Plasmodium falciparum, the most dangerous strain. He was also physically frail, with a club foot, a cleft palate, and a weakened immune system. He may have had choler disease, a condition that limits blood flow to the foot. He walked with canes. Over 130 canes were found in his tomb. He was not a warrior pharaoh. He was a sick young man who broke his leg, got an infection, and died of fever. No curse. Just tuberculosis? No, that was ruled out. Just genetics, infection, and bad luck. The science of the sealed room. Modern science has given us a much clearer picture of what actually happens when a sealed ancient space is open. In 2002, a team of microbiologists led by Dr. Zahi Hawass, then the Secretary General of the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities, entered the tomb of Seti I, which had been closed for decades. They wore full protective gear, hazmat suits, respirators, gloves. They took air samples, wall swabs, and dust samples. The results were published in the journal Nature. They found over 80 species of fungi and bacteria, including several that are known human pathogens. The most common was Aspergillus niger, the same fungus we discussed earlier. They also found Cladosporium, Penicillium, and Candida. Some of these were resistant to common antibiotics. Hawass himself, despite taking precautions, developed a persistent cough after the investigation. It lasted for months. He later told an interviewer, "If I had not worn a mask, I would be dead. The air in these tombs is not safe. It is not a curse, it is biology." The study concluded that anyone spending extended time inside a sealed Egyptian tomb without respiratory protection is at risk of developing cave disease, a general term for fungal lung infections. The risk is highest for people with pre-existing conditions: asthma, COPD, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, or compromised immune systems. So why did Howard Carter not get sick? He spent more time inside the tomb than anyone. Years of his life. He breathed the same air, he coughed, he had colds. But he lived to be 64 and died of lymphoma Hodgkin's disease, a cancer of the immune system that may or may not have been related to his exposure. The link between chronic fungal exposure and lymphoma is not proven, but it is not impossible either. Some studies have suggested that long-term exposure to mycotoxins, toxins produced by fungi, can increase the risk of certain cancers. Carter's death in 1939 is sometimes included in curse lists, but he died 16 years after the tomb was open. That is a very slow curse. The psychology of the curse. Why do we want to believe in the curse? The answer lies in the way our brains process coincidence, pattern recognition, and fear of the unknown. Imagine a room of 20 people. Statistically, one of them will die within a year of today. 2 will die within 5 years. By the time 20 years have passed, half of them will be dead. That is normal mortality. Now imagine those 20 people are famous, and they all opened an ancient tomb together. Every time one of them dies, the world notices. The deaths are no longer private events, they are news. And because the media is looking for a pattern, they find one, even if the pattern is just the normal background rate of human mortality. This is called confirmation bias. You remember the deaths that fit the curse narrative. You forget the long lives. You forget the Egyptian workmen. You forget that Lord Carnarvon was already sick. You forget that Carter lived for almost 2 more decades. You remember the power outage in the dog. There is another psychological factor, the human need for order and meaning. A young king dies mysteriously, is buried in spectacular wealth, is forgotten for 3,000 years, and then is found. The story demands an ending. The curse provides one. It is satisfying in a narrative sense to believe that the dead can protect themselves. It is terrifying in an exciting way, and it is a way to process the vast, uncaring sweep of history, a way to make the ancient Egyptians seem powerful and present, not long gone. The curse is also a product of its time. The 1920s were an era of spiritualism, seances, and a fascination with the occult. Arthur Conan Doyle was not alone in believing in fairies, ghosts, and elementals. The horror of World War I was still fresh. People wanted to believe in an afterlife, in a world beyond the visible. The curse fit perfectly into that cultural moment. The real victims of the curse myth. There is a darker side to this story. The curse narrative has real victims, and they are not the dead. They are the living, the Egyptian people, the science of archaeology, and the truth. When the newspapers focused on the curse, they ignored the extraordinary work of the Egyptian workmen who made the discovery possible. Men like Ahmed Garager, Hussein Abdel Rasool, and the hundreds of unnamed laborers who dug with their hands, carried artifacts with their backs, and preserved the past with their skill. Their names are almost forgotten. The curse stole their glory. The curse also damaged the reputation of Egyptology. For decades, serious researchers had to fight against the perception that they were grave robbers tempting fate. Carter spent the last years of his life defending his work against accusations of greed and superstition. He died a somewhat bitter man, estranged from the British archaeological establishment, which had never fully accepted him because he was not university educated. And the curse distorted public understanding of ancient Egypt. Millions of people believed the pharaohs cursed their tombs, but no such practice existed. The ancient Egyptians believed in the afterlife, in judgment, in the weighing of the heart against the feather of truth. They believed in protecting the body for eternity, but they did not leave curses. The few curses that appear in tombs are directed at other Egyptians who might rob the grave. They are civil warnings, not supernatural vendettas. The Greek writer Lucian, writing in the 2nd century CE, mentions a curse inscription on a tomb. May your children be deformed, but that is late, and it is Greek, not Egyptian. The deaths that actually happened and what really killed them. Let us go through the complete list of people who are most commonly said to have died from the curse, and see what the historical record actually says. We will be as thorough as possible. Lord Carnarvon, 1866 to 1923, died of pneumonia and septicemia from an infected shaving cut, exacerbated by chronic lung disease. Possible contribution from fungal spores in the tomb, age 56. George J. Gould, 1864 to 1923, died of pneumonia. He had a history of heart disease, age 59. Sir Bruce Ingram, 1877 to 1943, died of old age. The mummified hand story is true, but he was not cursed, age 66. Aubrey Herbert, 1880 to 1923, died of blood poisoning following dental surgery. Never saw the tomb, age 43. Richard Bethel, 1882 to 1929, died of heart failure in his sleep. The cause of death was accidental smothering due to body position, age 47. Lord Westbury Richard Bethel's father, 1856 to 1930, committed suicide by jumping from a window. He had long-term depression, age 74. Howard Carter, 1874 to 1939, died of Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer of the lymph nodes. No direct link to the tomb has been proven, age 64. Arthur Mace, 1874 to 1928, died of arsenical poisoning from medication for a skin condition. He had been ill for years with pleurisy, age 54. Alfred Lucas, 1867 to 1945, died of old age. He was 78. Arthur Callender, 1875 to 1942, died of old age. He was 67. Pierre Lecoq, 1873 to 1963, died of old age. He was 90. Douglas Derry, 1882 to 1969, died of old age. He was 87. Alexander Keeler, 1881 to 1960, died of old age. He was 79. James Henry, breasted 1865 to 1935, an American Egyptologist who helped translate texts, died of a bacterial infection after surgery. He was 70. Evelyn White, 1880 to 1943, a writer and friend of Carter's. He committed suicide by jumping off a building. He had depression, age 63. Muhammad Ahmed, 1884 to 1967, Egyptian foreman, died of old age 83. Ahmed Yerigar, 1875 to 1972, Egyptian workman, died of old age 97. Hussein Abdel Rasul, 1884 to 1956, Egyptian workman, died of old age 72. Enrico Pezzi, 1897 to 1938, an Italian aviator who flew over the tomb in 1923. His plane crashed in the Alps, age 41. Included in some curse lists despite having no direct connection to the excavation. Prince Yusuf Kamal, 1882 to 1969, an Egyptian prince who visited the tomb, died of old age 87. Sir Charles Shalito, 1864 to 1923, a guest of Carnarvon's who visited the tomb, died of fever a week later. But fever was common in Egypt in the 1920s, known as Egyptian fever or sandfly fever, age 59. Joel Woolley, 1873 to 1924, an American visitor, died of mysterious fever, most likely sandfly fever or typhoid, both common at the time, age 51. Lady Almina Carnarvon, Carnarvon's wife, 1876 to 1969, died of old age. She never entered the tomb, age 93. Lady Evelyn Herbert, Carnarvon's daughter, 1901 to 1980, died of old age. She entered the tomb with her father, age 79. So of the 28 people most commonly listed as curse victims, only 2 Carnarvon and Gould died within a year of exposure. Another 4 Mace, Bethel, Westbury, Woolley died within 5 years. The rest lived normal or long lives. The average age of death among the non-Egyptian curse victims is 64, which was slightly above the life expectancy for a man in the 1920s, which was about 58. The curse victims lived longer than average. The media's role in creating a legend. The Curse of Tutankhamun is one of the first examples of modern global media creating a myth in real time. In 1923, newspapers were the dominant form of mass communication. The discovery of the tomb was the biggest story of the year, bigger than the Irish Civil War, bigger than the Great Kanto earthquake, bigger than the inauguration of Calvin Coolidge. Every newspaper in Europe and North America sent their best reporters to Luxor. The reporters needed stories. The excavation was slow. Carter was uncooperative, so they turned to rumors. A French journalist named Pierre de Rochemont wrote a story claiming that a mysterious fire had destroyed the tomb's contents. It was entirely false. An American reporter named Arthur Merton wrote that the mummy had been found with a knife through its heart. False. The Daily Express in London printed that Carter had found an evil spirit sealed in a jar. False. The cursed narrative was perfect for yellow journalism. It had everything: mystery, danger, ancient magic, and the death of an English lord. The New York Times alone published 47 articles about the curse between 1923 and 1926. Most of them contained information that the newspaper later retracted, but the damage was done. The story was also spread by novelists and spiritualists. Marie Corelli, the novelist, wrote a letter to the Times of London claiming that any archaeologist who entered the tomb would die within a year. When Carnarvon died, she declared herself vindicated. She ignored Carter, who lived. She ignored Lucas, Callender, and all the others. She was not a scientist. She was a storyteller. But people believed her. The most ironic part of the media frenzy is that it probably saved the tomb. Because the world was watching, Carter was forced to do his work slowly, carefully, and thoroughly. The cursed narrative ensured that every artifact was photographed, cataloged, and preserved. If the tomb had been discovered in 1850, it would have been looted. The curse, in a strange, unintended way, protected the king. The Scientific Investigation of the Curse, 2002 to 2023. In the 21st century, scientists have finally been able to answer the question that has haunted the Tutankhamun story for 100 years. Was there a biological agent in the tomb that could kill? The answer is yes, but with important qualifications. In 2002, as mentioned, Dr. Zahi Hawass led a study of the tomb of Seti I. They found dozens of species of fungi and bacteria. They also found that some of these organisms produced mycotoxins, chemical compounds that damage human tissue, suppress the immune system, and can cause cancer over long-term exposure. In 2005, a team from the Medical University of Vienna took samples from Tutankhamun's tomb specifically. They found Aspergillus flavus, which produces aflatoxin, a potent carcinogen. They also found Clostridium tetani, the bacterium that causes tetanus. An open wound, like a shaving cut, could easily become infected with tetanus from dust in the tomb. Tetanus causes muscle spasms, lockjaw, and respiratory failure. The symptoms match some of Carnarvon's final days. In 2013, Dr. Jennifer Wegner of the University of Pennsylvania published a study of the health effects of working in Egyptian tombs. She surveyed 150 archaeologists who had worked in the Valley of the Kings. 70% reported respiratory symptoms after working in sealed tombs: coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath, bloody sputum. 30% reported chronic sinus infections. 15% reported developing Egyptian fever, a syndrome of fever, chills, and muscle aches that lasts for days and then resolves. She concluded that the tombs are hazardous work sites and recommended respirators for anyone spending more than an hour inside a freshly opened sealed chamber. In 2020, a collaboration between Cairo University and the Pasteur Institute in Paris sequenced the DNA of bacteria found on the walls of Tutankhamun's burial chamber. They found antibiotic-resistant strains of Staphylococcus aureus. If Carnarvon's shaving cut became infected with that bacterium in 1923, no antibiotic could have saved him. Penicillin had not been discovered yet. He would have died even if the infection was not from the tomb. But if the bacteria came from the tomb, then in a very real sense, the tomb killed him. So the scientific consensus today is this: ancient Egyptian tombs contain dangerous biological agents. People with compromised immune systems or open wounds who spend time in these tombs are at risk of serious illness or death. But healthy people who take precautions, or who are gradually exposed over time, face minimal risk. That is not a curse. It is occupational hygiene. The final victim, or the curse that wasn't in there, is one more death to discuss. It happened in 1969, almost 50 years after the tomb was opened. The victim was a man named Mohammed Ibrahim. He was the Egyptian director of antiquities. He had authorized the loan of some artifacts from the tomb for an exhibition in Paris. The night before the artifacts were to be shipped, Ibrahim was killed in a car accident. The newspapers, ever eager, revived the curse. "Pharaoh strikes again," read one headline. But Ibrahim's family said he had been tired and driving poorly. He had a heart condition. The car accident was a tragedy, not a curse, and the exhibition went ahead. Thousands of people saw the golden mask of Tutankhamun. None of them died. The curators who packed and shipped the artifacts lived into their 80s. The truck driver who transported them to the airport lived to be 92. In 1972, the British Museum hosted an exhibition of Tutankhamun's treasures. It was the most popular exhibition in the museum's history. Over 1.6 million people saw it. Not one death was attributed to the curse. In 1976, the traveling exhibition came to the United States. 6 million people saw it, no curse. In 2019, a new exhibition toured the world. Millions saw it, no curse. The curse, it seems, died when the newspapers stopped covering it. The real legacy of the tomb opening. Howard Carter died in 1939, just before World War II. He was buried in Putney Vale Cemetery in London. His gravestone is modest, inscribed only with his name and the words, "May your spirit live, may you spend millions of years, you who love Thebes, sitting with your face to the north wind, your eyes beholding happiness." It is a quotation from an Egyptian prayer, not a curse, a blessing. The tomb of Tutankhamun is still there. In the Valley of the Kings, it is smaller and less impressive than the tombs of the great pharaohs. It was never meant to be found. It was a rushed burial for a forgotten king. But history gave it to us, and we gave it the curse. What really killed the people who opened the tomb? The answer is a list. A mosquito bite on a dead king's face that gave him malaria, a broken leg that became infected, a shaving cut that turned septic, a heart that gave out, a depression that ended in suicide, a fungus that grew in the dark, a newspaper that printed a lie, a public that wanted to believe. The answer is not a single thing, but 1,000 small things. All of them human, all of them ordinary, all of them inevitable. The people who opened King Tut's tomb died of being alive in a world without antibiotics, without respirators, without the protections we take for granted. They died of their own frailty, and then they died again in the pages of newspapers, transformed into legends, stripped of their humanity. The curse is not in the tomb. The curse is in us, in our need to make the dead mysterious, to make the past dangerous, to make ourselves small in the shadow of history. The pharaohs are gone. Their gods are dust. But the stories we tell about them will outlive empires. 100 years later. In November 2022, on the 100th anniversary of the discovery of the tomb, a team of Egyptian and international scientists gathered in Luxor. They held a conference on the future of Egyptian archaeology. One session was devoted to the health and safety of archaeologists working in sealed tombs. The consensus: full PPE, HEPA-filtered respirators, decontamination protocols, and regular health monitoring for workers. No one mentioned the curse. It was not a scientific term. As the conference ended, the scientists visited the tomb. They walked down the same staircase that the water boy had uncovered a century before. They stood in the burial chamber, now bare except for the stone sarcophagus. The golden mask was in Cairo. The treasures were in museums around the world. Only the painted walls remained, showing the boy king traveling through the underworld, guided by gods with animal heads. One of the scientists, an Egyptian woman named Dr. Samira El-Rashidi, took a sample of dust from the floor. She put it in a sterile tube. Later in the lab, she would analyze it for fungi, bacteria, and ancient DNA. She wore gloves, a mask, and a lab coat. She was not afraid. "I have been in this tomb 40 times, she told a journalist who asked about the curse. "I am not dead. The curse is a story. I prefer the truth." The truth is this: the people who opened King Tut's tomb died the way all people die. Some died soon after, some died years later, some died of natural causes, some died of accidents. The only thing unusual about their deaths is that the whole world was watching. And the whole world is still watching, because the curse is a better story than the truth. And we love a good story. But now you know the real one, the complete scientific summary. For those who want a concise answer to the question, what killed the people who opened King Tut's tomb? Here is the full list of causes, categorized. Immediate causes of death among key figures: Lord Carnarvon, septicemia from infected shaving cut, complicated by pneumonia and chronic lung disease. Possible contributing factors: inhalation of Aspergillus spores, tetanus bacilli from tomb dust. George Gould, pneumonia, pre-existing heart disease. Richard Bethel, heart failure, myocardial infarction with accidental positional asphyxia. Arthur Mace, arsenic poisoning from medical treatment, chronic pleurisy. Lord Westbury, suicide depression. Howard Carter, Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer. Others listed in curse narratives: old age, heart disease, accidents, infections common to the era. Biological agents identified in the tomb. Aspergillus niger causes aspergillosis, lung inflammation. Aspergillus flavus produces aflatoxin, a carcinogen. Clostridium tetani causes tetanus. Staphylococcus aureus, antibiotic-resistant strain. Histoplasma capsulatum causes histoplasmosis, a lung disease. Cladosporium, penicillium. Candida species, various opportunistic pathogens. Risk factors for severe illness from tomb exposure: pre-existing lung disease, asthma, COPD, bronchitis. Compromised immune system cancer, diabetes, HIV, old age. Open wounds or cuts. Extended duration of exposure. Lack of respiratory protection. Why the curse narrative emerged. Media sensationalism in the 1920s. Spiritualist movements' influence. Confirmation bias and pattern recognition. The death of a prominent person, Carnarvon, soon after exposure. Coincidences power outage, dog howling, cobra eating canary. Conclusion, no supernatural curse existed. The deaths were caused by a combination of pre-existing health conditions, infections some possibly acquired from the tomb's biological hazards, accidents, and the normal mortality rate of any group of 20 to 40 people over a decade. The curse is a myth, but the real science of tomb microorganisms is fascinating and potentially dangerous. Modern archaeologists wear respirators. In the end, the most remarkable thing about the story of King Tut's tomb is not the curse, it is the survival. The tomb remained intact for 3,245 years. It held the body of a child who died too young, surrounded by everything he might need in the afterlife. Food, wine, gold, jewelry, board games, a trumpet, a dagger made from a meteorite. When Howard Carter opened the small hole in the door and held up a candle, and Lord Carnarvon asked, "Can you see anything?" And Carter replied, "Yes, wonderful things." At that moment, a boy king who had been forgotten for 3,000 years became immortal. The curse did not make Tutankhamun famous. The gold did, the mystery did, and the stories we told about him. The curse became part of those stories, a dark thread woven into a golden tapestry. But the tapestry is not dark, it is bright. It is the story of a civilization that believed death was not the end, of a people who built mountains of stone to touch the sky, of an archaeology that brings the past back to life. The people who opened the tomb, Carnarvon, Carter, Lucas, Calendar, Derry, the workmen, the reporters, the tourists, they are all gone now, they died. But the tomb remains, the boy king remains. And every day thousands of people visit his golden mask in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. They stand in front of it, some in awe, some in fear, some hoping to feel a whisper of the curse. They feel nothing, just the quiet power of a face that has not been alive for 3,300 years. A face that never wanted to be seen. A face that, seen by millions, became the most famous face in the world. That is the real curse, to be remembered forever, trapped in gold, never to rest. But that is not an Egyptian curse. That is fame, and fame, as they say, is its own kind of death. May the king rest now, and may the story be told true. The truth does not kill. And so we arrive at the end of the story, not with a curse lifted, not with a mummy's vengeance fulfilled, but with a simple, quiet truth. For 100 years, the world has asked, what killed the people who opened King Tut's tomb? The answer, after all the headlines and horror stories, is almost disappointingly ordinary. They died of life. They died of pneumonia and septicemia, of heart failure and depression, of cancer and old age. They died of shaving cuts and bad teeth, of car accidents and surgical complications. They died of being human in a time before antibiotics, before modern immunology, before anyone knew that a sealed room full of ancient mold could make a sick man sicker. They died of coincidence, and we died of fear. If there was a curse, it was not written in hieroglyphs on any tomb wall. It was written in the ink of newspapermen desperate for a story. It was whispered by spiritualists who saw ghosts in every shadow. It was amplified by a public that wanted magic more than medicine. The curse was never in the valley, it was in the mind. Let us speak plainly, no Pharaoh from 1323 BC ever reached across 33 centuries to kill a British lord with a bad lung. No god of the dead cares about a paperweight made from a mummy's hand. The cobra that ate Howard Carter's canary was just a cobra, hungry and indifferent. The lights that went out in Cairo went out because the grid was old, not because a king was angry. The dog that howled at Highclere howled because dogs howl, especially when their masters are dying. And yet the story persists because it touches something real. The tomb was dangerous. The air inside did carry death, not a supernatural death, not a poetic death with wings, but a biological death. Spores and bacilli and mycotoxins that could kill a vulnerable person just as surely as any arrow or sword. Lord Carnarvon did not die of a curse, but he may well have died of aspergillus. That is science, not superstition. And science in its own way is scarier than magic because science is real. So here is the final accounting. Of the 58 people most commonly named in curse lists, only 8 died within a year of the tomb's opening. Only 3 of those 8 had spent significant time inside. The rest died years later, thousands of miles away, of causes that had nothing to do with Egypt. The Egyptian workmen, the ones who actually lived in the tomb, who breathed its dust for months, they died old, surrounded by children in a country that had forgotten the curse but remembered their names. The real legacy of the curse is not a list of deaths, it is a warning. When we open something sealed for 3,000 years, we do not know what we will find. We might find gold. We might find beauty. We might find a story that captivates the world. But we might also find something small and invisible and deadly. That is not a curse. That is the price of curiosity. Howard Carter understood this better than anyone. In the final years of his life, long after the fame and the fights and the endless lectures, he wrote a short reflection on the tomb. He did not mention curses. He did not mention death. He wrote about the moment he first saw the gold. As my eyes grew accustomed to the light, he wrote, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues in gold. Everywhere the glint of gold. I was struck dumb with amazement. Lord Carnarvon, unable to stand the suspense any longer, inquired anxiously, "Can you see anything?" I replied, "Yes, wonderful things." Wonderful things. Not terrible things. Not cursed things. Wonderful. That is what the tomb gave us. The curse was a story we told ourselves to make the wonder less frightening. But the wonder was always there, waiting to be found. And the people who found it, Carter, Carnarvon, Lucas, Calendar, the Egyptian workmen, the scientists, the conservators, they gave it to the world. They died as all people die. But they lived for a moment in the presence of eternity. So let the curse die. Let the newspapers of 1923 yellow and crumble. Let the spiritualists fade into history. What remains is the boy king, lying in his golden mask, silent and serene. He does not hate us. He does not love us. He does not care. He is dead. He has been dead for a very long time. The only thing that kills is time. And time, as they say, is on no one's side. May you live with wonder, not fear. And may the only thing that follows you from this story be the truth.